The soft hum of medical equipment filled the sterile air of room 509 at St. Clair's private hospital. The scent of antiseptic clung to the walls, mingling with the faint aroma of fresh flowers left by visitors who had long stopped coming. In the middle of the room, hooked up to machines that monitored every beat of his heart and every breath he took, lay Alexander Grant, a man who had once been the pulse of New York's business elite. But now he was just still. Emily Carter adjusted her gloves as she prepared to change Alexander's bandages. At 24, Emily had been a nurse for only 2 years, but her dedication and compassion made her stand out among her peers. She approached every patient with care, believing that no matter how hopeless a situation seemed, her presence could make a difference. And Alexander's case was the most challenging she'd faced yet. He had been in a coma for 6 months following a catastrophic car accident. His family, influential and cold, had spared no expense to ensure he received the best medical care, but their faith in his recovery had long since dwindled. To them, he was a shell of the man they once knew, but to Emily he was still there, somewhere beneath the stillness. As she gently cleaned the wounds on his arms and adjusted the sheets, Emily spoke softly, as she did every day. "Well, Alex," she began, her voice light, "you wouldn't believe the morning I had. The coffee machine broke again, and I swear the universe is conspiring against me having caffeine." She chuckled to herself, even though she knew there would be no response. "But don't worry, I saved you from hearing me complain for too long." Talking to him had become second nature. It filled the silence, made the room feel less like a waiting tomb and more like a space where life still lingered. She told him about her day, her frustrations, the little victories, and sometimes even her fears. She wasn't sure why she felt so connected to him, but something about Alexander's peaceful, unmoving face made her believe he was listening. Just as she was about to finish adjusting the IV, the sharp sound of high heels clicking against the polished floor echoed through the hallway, growing louder until the door swung open with a force that rattled the walls. Victoria Grant, Alexander's mother, swept into the room like a cold wind. She was a woman who wore her wealth-like armor, her designer clothes impeccable, her perfectly styled hair not a strand out of place. But her eyes, a piercing shade of ice blue, held no warmth. Emily straightened instinctively, masking her surprise. "What are you doing?" Victoria's voice was sharp, laced with disdain as her gaze swept over Emily, landing on the gentle way her hands rested on Alexander's arm. Emily removed her gloves calmly, placing them in the bin before turning to face Victoria. "I'm changing his bandages, Mrs. Grant." Victoria's lips curled into a sneer. "I didn't ask what you were doing. I asked why you are the one doing it. I told the hospital I wanted the best for my son, not some novice nurse playing caretaker." Emily's jaw tightened, but she kept her tone steady. "I understand your concern, but I'm assigned to Mr. Grant's care because I'm qualified to be here. I treat all my patients with the utmost care, regardless of their status." Victoria stepped closer, her heels clicking ominously against the tile. "You may fool the others with your sweet little bedside manner, but I see right through you. You're here because you're cheap, convenient, and expendable. Do your job and keep your personal feelings out of it. My son doesn't need your sympathy." Emily clenched her fists at her sides, willing herself to stay composed. She took a deep breath, meeting Victoria's icy glare with a quiet strength. "I'm here to help your son," Emily said firmly. "Whether you believe it or not, I will continue to care for him with the respect and dignity he deserves. I won't abandon him just because it's easier to give up." For a moment, Victoria's eyes flickered, as if Emily's words had struck a nerve. But just as quickly, the steel returned to her gaze. "We'll see how long that lasts," she muttered before turning on her heel and sweeping out of the room, leaving a trail of tension in her wake. The door clicked shut, and the silence settled back over the room like a heavy blanket. Emily let out a slow breath. Turning back to Alexander, she smoothed the sheets over his chest, her hands lingering just a moment longer than necessary. "I'm sorry about that," she whispered, her voice softer now. "Your mother's well, you know." She pulled a chair up to his bedside and sat down, resting her elbows on her knees. The room hummed with the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, a sound that had become oddly comforting over time. "You know, I don't care what she says," Emily continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe you're still in there fighting, and I'm not going anywhere, Alex, I promise." As she sat there, the only sound was the beeping of the machines and the quiet, steady breathing of the man in the bed. But somewhere, deep in the recesses of Alexander's mind, something stirred. A faint flicker of awareness. Emily didn't know it yet, but her words were more than just a one-sided conversation. They were a lifeline, pulling Alexander closer to the surface, closer to the world he had left behind. And soon, everything would change. The days at St. Clair's private hospital blended into one another like watercolors on a damp canvas, soft, repetitive, and predictable. For most, room 509 was just another space where hope faded with each passing hour. But for Emily Carter, it had become the center of her world. It was on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind where the world outside seemed to hold its breath, that something different happened. Emily was carefully changing Alexander Grant's bandages, her hands steady from weeks of practice. She hummed softly, a tune she wasn't even aware she'd memorized, filling the sterile silence of the room. As she reached for a fresh gauze pad, she felt it, a faint, almost imperceptible twitch beneath her fingers. Her eyes darted to his hand, disbelief flooding her senses. Was that real? She stared, her breath caught in her throat, waiting to see if it would happen again. After a few seconds of nothing, she shook her head, dismissing it as her imagination playing tricks on her. Maybe it was just a muscle spasm, something involuntary. But as she continued her work, her heart beat a little faster, her mind replaying the moment over and over. Later that evening, as she prepared to leave, the image of Alexander's twitching fingers haunted her thoughts. Against her better judgment, she returned to his room, standing by his bedside, watching him as if willing him to move again. Nothing. But Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was changing. The next morning, Emily approached Dr. Harris, the attending physician overseeing Alexander's case. She hesitated outside his office before finally knocking. "Come in," his deep voice echoed. Emily stepped inside, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Dr. Harris, I think I noticed something unusual with Mr. Grant yesterday." Dr. Harris raised an eyebrow, peering over his glasses. "Unusual?" "Yes," Emily nodded. His fingers, they twitched, twice. The doctor sighed, leaning back in his chair. "Emily, we've seen involuntary muscle reflexes before in comatose patients. It's common. It doesn't necessarily indicate cognitive function. But this felt different," she insisted, her voice firm but respectful. "It wasn't just a spasm. It was," she stopped, realizing how it sounded, hopeful, naive. Dr. Harris offered her a sympathetic smile. "I appreciate your dedication, Emily. But you can't let yourself get too attached. I know it's hard, but sometimes patients don't come back." Emily swallowed hard, nodding, but as she left his office, she knew she couldn't let it go. From that day forward, Emily became more attentive. She spent every free moment at Alexander's bedside, gently stretching his limbs, massaging his muscles, and speaking to him as if he were wide awake. "Good morning, Alex," she'd whisper, pulling back the curtains to let the sunlight spill into the room. "You should see how beautiful it is outside today. I think you'd like it." She told him about the mundane details of her life, her annoying neighbor who always played loud music at 3 a.m., the elderly patient down the hall who called her sunshine, and how she missed her father, who had passed away when she was a child. She spoke of her mother's illness, the hospital bills that never stopped coming, and how exhausting it was to keep everything together. And even though he never responded, Emily felt like Alexander was listening. One evening, a heavy storm rolled through the city. The rain lashed against the hospital windows, and the steady drum of thunder vibrated through the walls. Emily's shift had technically ended hours ago, but she found herself unable to leave. Something about the storm made her feel like Alexander shouldn't be alone. She pulled a chair closer to his bed, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee. The only light in the room came from the dim glow of the heart monitor, casting soft green reflections on the walls. "You know," she began, her voice barely louder than a whisper, "I used to love storms. When I was little, my dad would let me sit by the window with him, and we'd count the seconds between the lightning and thunder." She paused, her gaze drifting to Alexander's still face. But after he died, storms just felt lonely. The words hung heavy in the room, mingling with the distant rumble of thunder. Emily set her coffee down and reached for Alexander's hand, holding it gently between her own. "I don't know why I'm telling you this," she murmured, her eyes stinging with unshed tears. "Maybe because you're the only one who can't tell me everything will be okay when it won't. Or maybe I just don't want to feel like I'm the only one still fighting." A tear slipped down her cheek, landing softly on the back of his hand. She wiped it away quickly, embarrassed by her own vulnerability. even in front of someone who couldn't hear her. But then it happened. A subtle, undeniable squeeze of her fingers. Emily's breath hitched. She froze, staring down at their intertwined hands, her heart pounding in her chest. "Alex," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you?" She waited, her eyes wide, her pulse racing. But the moment passed, and his hand went limp again, as if it had never moved at all. Emily blinked back tears, unsure if she was imagining things, but deep down she knew what she felt. Something inside Alexander Grant was waking up. Over the following days, Emily became even more devoted, her belief unwavering despite the skepticism of her colleagues. She continued to talk to Alexander, to share her fears, her hopes, and her dreams, unaware that with each word, she was pulling him closer to the surface. And though he couldn't speak or move, yet Alexander was listening. In the depths of his mind, her voice was the anchor holding him steady in the storm of his unconsciousness. The warmth of her touch, the sincerity of her words, they were the lifeline pulling him back to the world. And soon the world would see the impossible happen. The morning sun spilled through the blinds of room 509, casting soft golden rays across the sterile white sheets. Emily Carter pushed the door open with her usual gentle touch, a cup of coffee in one hand and a clipboard in the other. It was just another routine day, or so she thought. As she stepped inside, ready to greet the man who had become more than just a patient to her, she felt an odd shift in the room. The familiar hum of machines was still there, but something felt different. She glanced at Alexander Grant, expecting the same peaceful stillness that had defined his presence for months. But her breath caught in her throat. Alexander's eyes were open. Wide, clear, and unmistakably aware, they locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a shockwave through her entire body. For a moment, Emily stood frozen, unsure if she was hallucinating from exhaustion, or if this was some cruel trick of her mind. But the longer she stared, the more undeniable it became. "Alex?" she whispered, her voice trembling, barely audible over the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. His gaze didn't waver. Those piercing blue eyes, once lifeless and distant, now shimmered with something unmistakably real, recognition. The coffee slipped from her hand, crashing to the floor and shattering, but she didn't even flinch. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming relief washing over her. She rushed to his side, her fingers fumbling to press the emergency button for assistance, but her eyes never left his. "Alex, can you hear me?" she whispered, reaching out to gently brush a stray lock of hair from his forehead. His lips moved ever so slightly, trying to form words that his body wasn't yet ready to produce. But his eyes, they spoke volumes. Tears welled up in Emily's eyes as she gripped his hand, feeling the faintest pressure of his fingers curling around hers. It wasn't strong, but it was real. "You're back," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You're really back." The room soon flooded with doctors and nurses, their faces a mix of shock and professionalism, as they rushed to assess Alexander's condition. Dr. Harris, who had long dismissed Emily's hopes, stared in disbelief as Alexander's eyes followed Emily's every movement, as if she were his lifeline in a sea of unfamiliar faces. But through all the chaos, Alexander's gaze never left Emily. Days passed, and Alexander's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. Though his speech was slow to return, his mind was sharp, and his determination to heal was relentless. Physical therapy sessions were grueling, but he pushed through them with a focus that astonished the medical staff. But it wasn't the doctors or the specialists he sought after his sessions, it was Emily. Whenever she entered the room, a warmth flickered in his eyes. He'd track her movements with a subtle smile, his fingers tapping gently against the bed whenever she spoke, as if trying to respond even when his voice failed him. And when he finally could speak, the first words he whispered weren't to his family or his doctors. They were to her. It was late one evening, long after visiting hours had ended, when Emily found herself alone with Alexander. The hospital was quiet, save for the distant hum of machines and the occasional soft footsteps echoing down the hall. Emily sat by his bedside, her fingers absent-mindedly tracing patterns on the back of his hand as she recounted the day's events. "I swear if the coffee machine breaks one more time, I might lose it," she chuckled softly, glancing at him with a fond smile. "You'd think in a place like this, they'd at least get the basics right." Alexander's lips curled into a faint smile, and then, to her surprise, he spoke, his voice raspy but filled with warmth. "I heard all of it." Emily's breath hitched. She turned to him, her heart pounding. "What?" His eyes met hers, steady and sincere. "Every word, every story." Tears welled in her eyes, blurring her vision as the weight of his words sank in. "You kept me alive," he whispered, his voice cracking with emotion. "You saved me." Emily's heart swelled, a mix of relief, disbelief, and something deeper, something she wasn't ready to name. She squeezed his hand gently, blinking back tears. "I was just doing my job," she whispered, though even she knew it wasn't the full truth. Alexander's eyes darkened slightly, his grip tightening ever so slightly around hers. No, it was more than that. As weeks passed, their bond deepened in ways neither of them could have anticipated. Alexander confided in Emily more than anyone else, sharing memories of his life before the accident, his fears about the future, and the loneliness he felt despite being surrounded by wealth and status. Emily, in turn, found herself opening up about her struggles, her father's death, her mother's illness, and the overwhelming pressure of trying to keep everything together. In Alexander, she found not just a patient, but a confidant, a friend. But with that friendship came an undeniable tension. Every lingering glance, every accidental touch, sent sparks flying between them. Emily tried to maintain professional boundaries, reminding herself that she was his nurse, nothing more. But her heart betrayed her with every beat. And Alexander felt it too. One evening, as the sun set and bathed the room in golden light, Alexander finally broke the silence that had been building between them. "Emily," he whispered, his voice stronger now, more certain. "I need to tell you something." She looked at him, her heart racing. "What is it?" He reached out, his hand trembling slightly as he brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch sent shivers down her spine. "You didn't just save my life," he murmured, his eyes locking onto hers. "You saved me. You pulled me back when I was ready to let go." Emily's breath hitched, her heart pounding in her chest. "And now," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, "I can't imagine my life without you." Tears filled Emily's eyes, but she shook her head, her voice trembling. "Alex, I don't know what to say." "Say you feel it too," he whispered, his eyes pleading with hers. "Because I know you do." Emily closed her eyes, battling the whirlwind of emotions inside her. She had fought so hard to keep her feelings at bay, but now, with his heart laid bare before her, she couldn't deny it any longer. When she opened her eyes, she saw the truth reflected in his gaze, the same truth that echoed in her heart. "I do," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I feel it too." And in that moment, amidst the beeping of machines and the soft glow of the fading sun, they both knew their lives had changed forever. The sun had barely risen over St. Clair's private hospital when the storm rolled in, not from the skies, but from the polished marble hallways leading to room 509. Victoria Grant, sharp as ever in her tailored suit and icy demeanor, strode into her son's room unannounced, her high heels clicking against the tile like gunfire. Her eyes, the same piercing blue as Alexander's, immediately darted to where he sat propped up in bed, laughing softly at something Emily had just whispered. It wasn't just the casual intimacy of the moment, the way Emily's hand rested gently on Alexander's arm, or how his eyes sparkled in a way they never did when his mother was around. No, it was something deeper, something Victoria recognized but refused to accept. Her voice sliced through the warmth like a blade. "Well," she sneered, folding her arms across her chest. "I see the rumors weren't exaggerated." Emily stiffened, her heart leaping into her throat as she turned to face Victoria. The softness vanished from Alexander's expression, replaced by a guarded tension. "Mother," Alexander said coolly, his voice steady but laced with warning. "What are you doing here?" Victoria's gaze didn't leave Emily. I should be asking her that. She took a step forward, her eyes narrowing. "Tell me, Miss Carter, how long did it take? How long before you realized you could manipulate my son while he was at his weakest?" Emily's face flushed, a mix of shock and indignation surging through her. "Mrs. Grant, with all due respect, I have never." But Victoria cut her off, her voice rising. "Don't lie to me. You think I can't see what's happening here? You latched onto him while he was helpless, and now you're playing the heroine, hoping to secure a place in his will." Emily's breath caught. The accusation stung deeper than she expected. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but the weight of Victoria's words hung heavy in the room, suffocating. Alexander, sensing Emily's turmoil, snapped. "Enough, Mother." His voice boomed stronger than it had been in weeks. "Emily saved my life. She cares about me. This isn't about money, and you know it." But Victoria's eyes gleamed with cold satisfaction. "Of course she cares. Why wouldn't she? You're Alexander Grant, the millionaire who can give her everything she never had." The words echoed in the sterile room, and suddenly Emily felt exposed, vulnerable in a way she hadn't anticipated. Her heart pounded in her chest, but this time it wasn't from affection, it was from humiliation. She stepped back, her voice barely a whisper. "Is that what you think, Alex?" Alexander's head whipped toward her, his expression softening instantly. "No, Emily, you know I don't." But Emily shook her head, her eyes glistening. "Do I? Or am I just another project you felt obligated to care about because I was there when no one else was?" Alexander's face crumpled, the words hitting harder than any physical blow. "I need to go," Emily whispered, her voice breaking. Without another word, she rushed out of the room, leaving Alexander struggling to rise from the bed, his heart shattering with every step she took away from him. The days that followed were hollow. Alexander tried to reach out, calls, messages, even asking the hospital staff, but Emily had vanished. It was as if she had never been part of his life, leaving behind only the ghost of her presence in the sterile room that now felt colder than ever. Without Emily, the walls of the hospital felt suffocating. Alexander's recovery slowed, his motivation waning with each passing day. His therapist noticed, but he brushed off their concerns with forced smiles and empty reassurances. But at night, when the world outside grew quiet, the emptiness was unbearable. He would close his eyes and hear her voice, soft, soothing, telling him stories about her childhood, her fears, her dreams. He missed the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, the warmth of her hand in his, the way she saw him, not the millionaire, not the patient, but him. And now, he wasn't sure he could face a life without her. Meanwhile, Emily tried to bury herself in routine, taking shifts at another hospital across town. But nothing could fill the void Alexander had left behind. She replayed their last conversation over and over, questioning everything. Did he really love me, or was it just gratitude? Did I let myself believe in something that was never real? But no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that leaving was the right choice, her heart betrayed her. She missed him, his stubbornness, his wit, the way his eyes softened when he looked at her. At night she would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if he thought about her too, wondering if she had made a mistake by walking away. But the fear of being just another fleeting moment in his life kept her from returning. Weeks passed. Alexander, unable to bear the weight of his own heart ache, finally decided to take matters into his own hands. With the help of his assistant, he organized a press conference, not for the media, not for publicity, but for her. He stood before the cameras, his heart racing, his hands trembling slightly, but his eyes burned with determination. "I'm here today," he began, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside, "not to talk about my recovery or my business. I'm here to talk about the woman who saved my life." The room fell silent. "Her name is Emily Carter. She was my nurse during the most difficult time of my life. But she was more than that. She was my anchor, my hope, and the reason I'm standing here today." He paused, his throat tightening. "To Emily, if you're watching this, I need you to know what we shared wasn't just because of my condition. It wasn't gratitude. It was real. You saved me in more ways than you'll ever know, and I'm lost without you." Across town in her small apartment, Emily sat frozen in front of the TV, tears streaming down her face. His words pierced through every doubt, every fear, and she realized the truth she had been too scared to face. She still loved him. Without another thought, she grabbed her coat and rushed out the door, her heart pounding with hope and desperation. Because some loves are too powerful to walk away from. And she wasn't going to lose him again. The bright lights of the press conference hall glared down on Alexander Grant, but he barely noticed. Standing tall behind the podium, dressed in a tailored suit, he looked every bit the powerful businessman the world knew him to be. But today he wasn't here as the millionaire mogul. Today he was here as a man stripped bare of pride and pretense. Cameras flashed, reporters leaned forward, their pens poised, expecting another story about his miraculous recovery or his return to the corporate world. But Alexander's gaze wasn't on them. His eyes, filled with a raw, undeniable emotion, stared straight into the cameras, as if trying to reach her. "I'm not here to talk about my company," he began, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I'm not here to discuss my recovery or future business plans." The room fell silent, the anticipation hanging heavy in the air. "I'm here to talk about the woman who saved my life," he continued, his voice softening. "Her name is Emily Carter. She was my nurse, but more than that, she was my light in the darkest time of my life. When I was lost in a coma, it was her voice, her kindness, her strength that pulled me back. He paused, his throat tightening as he fought back the tears threatening to spill. I didn't just wake up because of medical care. I woke up because of her. And somewhere along the way, I realized I wasn't just grateful, I was in love. Gasps echoed through the room, but Alexander didn't care. Emily, if you're watching this, he said, his voice trembling, I need you to know, what we shared wasn't just circumstance. It was real. I love you. And I don't want to live another day without you. Miles away, in her tiny apartment, Emily Carter sat frozen in front of her old television, tears streaming down her cheeks. She could barely breathe as Alexander's words washed over her, breaking down every wall she had built around her heart. She thought back to every moment they had shared, his soft smiles, the way his eyes lit up when she walked into the room, the gentle way he had touched her hand. It wasn't just gratitude. It was love. She had been too afraid to believe it before, but now, hearing him confess it to the world, there was no denying it. Grabbing her coat, Emily rushed out the door, her heart pounding as if it were trying to lead her back to him. At St. Clair's private hospital, Alexander sat in the physical therapy room, his mind replaying the press conference over and over. Doubts crept in. What if she didn't see it? What if she didn't believe me? Just as he was about to lose hope, the door creaked open. He turned, and there she was. Emily stood in the doorway, her eyes glistening with tears, her breath shaky as she took him in. For a moment, neither of them moved, the world around them fading away. Then, with a surge of determination, Alexander pushed himself up from the chair. His legs trembled beneath him, the pain sharp, but he didn't care. With the help of his crutches, he took one step, then another, until he stood just inches from her. Emily's heart ached at the sight, but it was the look in his eyes that broke her completely. Raw, vulnerable, filled with a love so pure it made her breath hitch. Without thinking, she threw her arms around him, burying her face in his chest as sobs racked her body. I'm so sorry, she whispered through her tears. I should have never left. I love you, Alex. I've loved you for so long. Alexander's arms tightened around her, his own tears falling freely now. You're here, he whispered, his voice cracking. That's all that matters. They stood there, wrapped in each other's embrace, letting the world fall away. In that moment, all the pain, all the misunderstandings, faded into nothing. All that remained was them. Months later, life had found a new rhythm. Emily opened a community health clinic, dedicating her life to helping those who couldn't afford the care they needed. Alexander, stepping away from the ruthless world of business, focused on charitable work, using his wealth to fund programs for underprivileged communities. But more importantly, they built a life together, a life filled with laughter, love, and healing. Their days were no longer defined by the walls of a hospital, but by the adventures they shared and the simple joy of being by each other's side. They weren't just lovers, they were partners, soulmates. And as they sat on the porch of their small countryside home, watching the sun set over the horizon, Emily rested her head on Alexander's shoulder, whispering the words that had brought them back to each other. You saved me too. And so, Emily and Alexander found not just healing, but a love that defied all odds, a love born in silence, nurtured through struggle, and solidified in the face of every obstacle life threw their way. Their journey reminds us that sometimes, the people who save us are the ones we least expect. And in the end, love isn't about grand gestures or perfect timing, it's about being there when it matters most. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to soul-stirring stories for more tales of love, resilience, and unexpected miracles. Turn on your notifications so you never miss a story that could inspire you or even change your life. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next heartwarming story.